Pastors, I want to talk to you about the gift of prophecy as it would apply to your church planting project. I want to do a little history first with you, take you back to the book of Acts and the day the Spirit was poured out on the church. I believe in many ways so much of what happened that day can get lost in the beauty of the supernatural that happened that day, and it was supernatural. But something happened in my study of that chapter when I found verse 11, where basically the people are saying, we came because of the noise, but when we got here it was the message that captured us. And the message was this: we heard you speaking the wonderful works of God in a language that we could understand. On the day of Pentecost, I believe the church was given the ability to speak supernaturally in a voice and a way that people could understand it. And I'm not talking about technical excellence here. I'm talking about the breathing of the Spirit into the words that you would speak into your culture. Jesus told his disciples in Acts chapter 1 verse 8 to not leave Jerusalem until the Spirit empowered them, and he said this, so that you could tell people about me everywhere. That is what I believe the day of Pentecost was about. I believe it was the empowerment of the voice of the church. That applies to your church plant, that God has planted you in a city to be the voice of heaven in that city. As it applies to your church planting project, let me give you 3 suggestions that I think might help you. First, I address this one, number 1, to the senior pastor in the church plant. God would ask you, I believe with all my heart, to spend time to develop an understanding of what your voice, your uniquely empowered voice of heaven sounds like. We're talking even more than just the style and the substance of your voice, but that word of the Lord that comes to you that you know did not come through your background and your history, but it was the Lord speaking to you, that you would cultivate that into your private time, that you would come to leadership meetings having had a word from the Lord, that you would lead your ministry based on a word more than you would a program. Secondly, in the church plant, that you would assemble that group of core leaders in your church and help them to discover their uniquely empowered voice from heaven. In fact, it's interesting, as I just recently studied the word harmony. The word harmony in the Greek language is a 2-part word. It means together and voice. In other words, it's a together voice. That's where the harmony comes from. But it's distinct voices that become together a voice that is applied to a community. You need to discover that as a group of leaders. My pastor, Roy Hicks Jr., said this to a group of us young pastors in training one day. He said, never have a meeting of your significant leaders where you're not giving time to the Holy Spirit to speak. Make room for the Spirit to speak, because those instructions that come from those breathed times of the Spirit will literally direct the course of the ministry. I believe this is what happened in Acts 13, and the entire Gentile missions movement was birthed out of that kind of a situation. And thirdly, as your leadership team gathers and you begin to increase the spectrum of your servant team, and you get people together that have practical ministry assignments that they need to do. Maybe it's painting houses, feeding the poor, sweeping somebody's yard. Whatever task you have, those are simply vehicles that lead you to a life that is held in bondage, and that's where you must train those teams to also be able to speak with the empowered voice of heaven. Or what happens is our ministry can become nothing more than a service club doing nice things in the community. Those teams that serve in those very practical and very needed ministries must be able to be trained by the core leadership of the church how to speak with the empowered voice of heaven. Our ministry is simply a vehicle that brings us to that place. The frontiers of darkness are not pushed back with anything that we do in the ministry, whether it's our lighting on our stage, or how hip our website is, or how well crafted our doctrinal statement is. Frontiers of darkness are pushed back by the empowered voice of heaven that displaces a lie and plants the truth. Let me say this one final word. Your city is waiting for your church plant to speak that unique word that's only given by the empowered voice of Pentecost. Discover that word and how to function in it, and everything will seem to fall into place. I bless you in what you're doing. It's my blessing to be with you today. Thank you so much.